DC. You are tuned into Taking Action here on WPFW 89.3 FM in the beautiful city of Washington, D.C. My name is Daniel Del Pielago, and today we have a very timely conversation, a conversation that needs to be had. We're going to be talking about what is happening with Reservation 13. I'm joined in studio by Maurice Cook, Caitlin Kokalova, and William Jordan from the Grassroots Planning Coalition. They are steering committee members. So they are going to give us an update on what is happening, and most importantly, how folks can get involved around the fight back around Reservation 13. So welcome, folks, to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't we start with just kind of an overview of what's happened, what's happened to date. It's been in the news quite a bit, but I'm sure there are folks like myself who need to know more about it. So can one of you kind of give us just an update, an overview of what's happened with Reservation 13?
Well, I'm going to start this conversation talking about our city's proclivity of giving away our public land.
That's right.
We really have to start there. And Reservation 13, for those who are not familiar, it abuts 19th Street Southeast. It houses now the D.C. City Jail, along with, it used to be the campus of our hospital that was stolen away from us, D.C. General. And now, through a relationship that our city has made with one of its developing profiteers and partners, Donatelli developers, the city has basically given this land away for peanuts, given the fact that we have an unaffordable housing crisis in this city. We have people who, week after week are setting up encampments because they have no place to live. They can't afford to live in the city any longer. And we have acre after acre of space on what is now coined Reservation 13, and we've given this space away to these exploitative developers. Right now, they're in the construction phase of building, quote unquote, mixed income housing, and the story around how the buildings were financed, the story around the zoning, the story around what type of public services or public amenities and opportunities for folks who are experiencing housing insecurity to be part of the new Reservation 13 plan is really all over the place. We can't get a clear answer as to what is going on. But, before we talk about the details, I think it's important to, put out the vision of what it could be.
That's right.
We're in an urgent situation that's impacting so many of our born and raised and long-term residents of their inability to be able to stay in the city. And, D.C., as, we have reached the popularity of being the most gentrified city in the nation. These tokenized, quote-unquote, mixed income schemes clearly will not be enough to actually create the type of security that our families, our people need in order to stay here in this city.
That's right. Well, thank you for that, Maurice. William, can you tell us a little bit about who are the players in this game, right? Because let's not talk about it kind of in the abstract, but who's benefiting from all of this, right? Who's giving away this land? Could you kind of talk from that angle?
Well, I'll take a quick step back. In 2002, the city began the process, because Reservation 13 belonged to the federal government. So in 2002, the city began to work with the federal government to have it transferred from federal control over to the city so that the city could develop it. And so Eleanor Holmes Norton was the key player behind trying to make that happen. So in 2006, Congress finally passed the legislation that transferred Reservation 13 and most of the Anacostia waterfront from the federal government over to the city. And then the city beginning back in 2002, began a planning process. So they laid out streets and who's going to live there, what kind of buildings, what kind of amenities and resources. And in 2006, once it passed, under the Fenty administration, they began to look for development teams. And so they put on an RFP and
a request for proposals,
and maybe 17 or more development teams responded, and they narrowed it down to 2. But as we know, the greed had already kicked in, and the market crashed in 2007, 2008, and basically killed those plans. So later in 2000, probably about 2007 and 8, the Fenty administration, they kept trying, but they couldn't get anywhere. So basically it was dead until 2014. And in 2014 or before, I need to check my notes, actually when Mayor Bowser, then on the council, was made the chair of economic development, that's when they restarted the process. And of course it went to Donatelli Development. And Donatelli Development, because none of the other teams wanted to participate, got its sole source. So they were awarded 2 parcels. Reservation 13 is much larger than 2 parcels, but they were awarded 2 parcels. They were supposed to build 2 buildings, and they got all the land on that metro stop for $10.
Wow.
Right. And they were supposed to build 2 buildings. Those buildings should have been built by 2018. And so we're in 2020, and none of those buildings have been built. Only one is in construction now. And so context for that is the mayor now says we need to build 36,000 new housing units, and her developer friends, when given free land for $10, took them from 2007 or 2014 to now 6 years, have not been able to do it. So if she's going to reach her goal and go back to the same people, I don't think it's possible.
And this is such a common theme, as Maurice pointed out, right? It's something, the giveaway to developers just keeps on happening without any logic. Like, and if an alien came up from outer space and had the sense to just do math and looked at some of these deals, they'd be like, what are you earthlings doing, right? Because it's so crazy. And I'm poking a little fun, but it has just gotten to this point where it's so ludicrous what's happening with land that could be used to house people in a city that sorely needs it. Caitlin, can you talk to us a little bit about the DC General families? What has been their role? What are they losing through this process? Are they losing? And, what's happening with that angle?
That's a great question. I actually want to cover 2 things with
Please.
this, because there's more than just the homeless families who used to be on Reservation 13. And as Maurice stated, DC General turned into a family shelter for many years, and then it was closed down. And when the mayor decided to create her short-term family housing, which many of those shelters have been opened recently throughout the city, which is an improvement. There are still hundreds of families that are being housed right now at motels and hotels along New York Avenue as well. But in addition to those families, there are over 100 women who stay at the Harriet Tubman Women's Shelter on Reservation 13. That is still open. DHS just opened up 75 additional beds there, too. So the connection that's been made between Reservation 13 and this particular Donatelli development has really been surrounding the women at the Harriet Tubman Shelter. Like William stated, there were original development plans to divide up the affordable housing amongst the 2 buildings that Donatelli proposed to develop. Recently, there's been a shift that one of those buildings is specifically going to be for permanent supportive housing, which is essentially housing for the most vulnerable people in our communities who may need additional case management supports. People who are in PSH units receive a voucher, or it's a place-based voucher that's tied to a unit, and they pay 30% of their income, and they also receive additional case management supports. So the second building in this transition, and we can maybe get back into the details of what the original plan was, but now the plan is to have 100 units of PSH units in this one building that Donatelli is proposing. DHS has said, we will move the women who are currently staying at Harriet Tubman Shelter into that building, which is interesting because that's usually not how the coordinated entry system works, which is how people who are experiencing homelessness, both families and singles, are placed. Typically, there's kind of like this hierarchy. If you are deemed through the housing assessment called a SPDAT to be very vulnerable, you'll get matched with a PSH voucher, and then you kind of get on this listing that prioritizes people based on that vulnerability, and it's almost like a first come, first served. So in order to specifically place women at Harriet Tubman into those units, they would have to do something different. Like, that's just not currently how the system works. I know I focused more on the Harriet Tubman question, and it's mainly because the DC General families, it's not there anymore.
Exactly.
But also the units that they're proposing to build wouldn't fit them. All of those 100 units that I just mentioned are supposed to be, I believe, one-bedroom efficiencies, which is not going to be large enough for a family.
That's right. Maurice, if you could talk to us about, what was promised, and we've kind of talked a little bit about it here, but what was the expectation, for people, as you mentioned, who sorely need housing?
Well, this deal has been shrouded in many secrets and backdoor agreements, and really a circumventing what I believe of the zoning process. So what was stated as far as the zoning was that there would be opportunities for mixed income usage in both buildings to deal with the financing. And I think that's a really big piece of this whole mystery. We are where we are today with really not knowing what's going on because of the breakdown of the financing of this project. But originally in the zoning agreement, both buildings were supposed to have affordable units, and a couple of months ago, DHS, along with OP and some others, were forced to meet with ANC 6B. And the interesting thing about Reservation 13, if anyone is familiar with the Stadium Armory Metro area, it abuts both Hill East, the Hill East neighborhood. And I'm remiss even using the term Hill East, but I'm trying to be as nice as I possibly can be.
Diplomatic.
But, diplomatic. It abuts the Hill East neighborhood, but it's actually sits in Ward 7, and because it also is squeezed in between the river. It is not connected to any other Ward 7 neighborhood, and so in a way, it's politically isolated. If you believe in conspiracy theories, it's really the perfect setup to have no real, citizen participation, other than those who reside now in the D.C. jail and perhaps those who reside in Harriet Tubman. But so they're kind of on an island, and as far as the zoning was concerned, both buildings, because they proposed to build two buildings, both buildings were supposed to be quote-unquote mixed income, which everyone should be aware of. If you see this term mixed income, please let your alert signals flare up, because it's never mixed. It's always predominantly market-based with a little symbolic gesture of affordability for most families here in the city. But both buildings were supposed to have quote-unquote affordable units. And then, like I said, DHS and a few other folks from the city came to meet with the ANC 6B, Hill East Task Force, and others at Eastern High School. And we were told that, no, they're going to segregate the buildings, right, to have both the Harriet Tubman residents in one building and then the market rate building across the street. And I immediately said, oh, well, that's going to do is increase segregation, racial segregation, economic segregation, and they literally will be across the street from one another. And how long will it be before the police and and Charles Allen's office and folks that they could get in touch with Vince Gray. And how long would it be before folks are complaining about the residents at the quote unquote Harriet Tubman building, where the fires would be called on to say, hey, look, we have poor people living right beside us, do something, because we're experiencing that all over the city. Mm-hmm. And so just recently, last week, there was an article regarding the challenge that Donatelli is having with the financing arrangement, which is putting a stall on further construction of the project.
Well, now, as we're talking, I'm just thinking, like, how do we get here, right? Like, what are the mechanisms that allow them, the city, the developers, to, just essentially do whatever they want to do? I don't know, William, that's a big question, but I don't know if you've got anything to say on that, because the word ludicrous is a little crazy, but it is. We're at that post. We're going ludicrous mode, as they said in that movie Spaceballs.
Well, clearly, you're trying to get me in trouble.
Yes.
But since I'm in trouble already, we might as well start. So, it's a scam. I mean, it's, I became familiar with Donatelli Development because I live in Columbia Heights in Ward 1, and they were the main developers there. And basically, every scam that they're pulling today at Hill East, they pulled in Ward 1. So if we look at Hill East, as mentioned, there were 2 buildings, right? But even beyond that, the original plans for those 2 buildings included 23 bedroom units, included 22 bedroom units. So there would have been units there that could have helped the residents transitioning from DC General or families that needed support. And so because the project, the land that they gave Donatelli Development was worth at least $6.8 million, right? And the city gave it both parcels to them for 10. Mm. Well, the reason for the discount, they said, is because the project would include affordable housing, and they can't make as much money if they have to build affordable housing, and it will help them get the project financed. So what do they do? So because the deal is a public-private deal between DNPED, the mayor's office is supposed to represent the interests of the public, and then the developers represent their interests. But because we depend on the city to look out for the public benefits in the project. But the city always adopts the position that the project is more important than the public benefit from the project, so they lean towards the developers. So even though they got the land for free, or $10, they couldn't get the project financed. So what Donatelli did in the largest building, which is 262 units, is got the city to agree to remove 20% of the 30% required affordability out of the building. Mm. Then they started to build it. But the city didn't go back and take the millions, which would have been $4 million worth of discount, back because they removed those units. They let them keep those dollars. And then later, once they got it under construction and this site became, which is something new, Opportunity Zone, a hedge fund came in and bought interest, 51% at least interest in their project. So no housing has been built, but a hedge fund has already came in my calculation, and gave Donatelli $45 or so million for their interests to buy into the deal. Wow. So I can't prove it yet, but it looks like they got a check and put $40 million in their pocket on a building that they took the affordable units out, rather than the city saying, give me my share so we can finance the second building. They let them keep the money. So they got the land free. They flipped the project, and this is the same thing they did above the Petworth Metro. So in Ward 1, they got the land for basically free. They cut a deal and then sold 50% of the deal to Magic Johnson's investment company back then, and pocketed that money. So what the city talks about is creating affordable housing and how do you finance affordable housing. But if you strip that away, it is how do we transfer public dollars into the pockets of developers. And then we're told that once those developers get rich, they will trickle down affordable housing and services, but DENPAD won't enforce the deal.
Ronnie Reagan is up in the sky or wherever he is, laughing at us, I would imagine. Caitlin, just to kind of piggyback on that, because I know you all have been very involved through the Grassroots Planning Coalition. This is, and I just want folks, I think we have to repeat it so folks really understand this, but this is common practice. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
This is definitely common practice. Going back to the giveaway of public land, too, in 2018, between January and June, 90 district properties were touching the surplus or disposition process in some capacity. So surplus and disposition is the way that DC gets rid of public land. They say, hey, this land is no longer needed for public purposes. Then they create a plan with a private developer to give away that land for peanuts, for nothing, for $1, $10, whatever. We've seen this happen. I think I was testifying about the Cromell School when we pulled those stats. We've seen this happen with the Franklin School, which is right downtown. Franklin Park is about to be renovated. But just as a recap, Franklin School used to be an adult learning facility. Then it became, over the years, eventually a men's shelter. It was closed around 2008, I believe. Someone can correct me on that. And people fought to not have it be closed, but it was closed for 10 years. Unfortunately, people who are experiencing homelessness passed away in the park across the street in the one that they're about to be renovating. And now it's going to be, it was surplus and disposed of to become a museum of words. So in the midst of truly an affordable housing crisis, we use that term all the time. I don't think people feel the weight of it. A lot of people we work with feel the weight of it. But I don't think people truly understand what that means because it's been said so much that it just is diluted. It doesn't mean anything to people anymore. The important thing for us to do in recognizing these patterns that you've laid out is to break it down in the way that William and Maurice have just described it. We have to know who the players are in all of this and recognize just how these mechanisms are working. It's complicated for a reason. It's complicated so that we can't figure out how to solve these issues and how to make affordable housing for people that is truly affordable to them, because affordability is subjective based on your personal income. But as was said earlier, the affordable housing that's being built isn't affordable to the people who need it the most. So those are just a few examples. Like I said, the Franklin School, the Cromell School. But one third example I'll give, and then I can pass it back on to you. Brooklyn Manor, for example. Okay. So I work at the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. Our office represents the tenants at Brooklyn Manor who have been fighting to maintain 535 units of truly affordable housing that are there now, some which are subsidized and some which are market rate. The developers coming in wants to essentially triple density and reduce the amount of affordable units there. That case had 2 lawsuits against that developer. And regardless of those 2 lawsuits, one was a zoning lawsuit and one was a familial discrimination case. The council unanimously decided to give that developer over $40 million in tax increment financing, so a subsidy so that they could complete that development, despite the fact that the community itself was saying, don't do this. If you do this, it's going to push us out. And that's just perpetuating the homelessness. But because people keep getting pushed outside of D.C., the stats are staying the same or lowering. Okay. So I think, again, we have to have a true understanding of what's going on. How can we say that homelessness is, we have to look at them at the same time. The fact that the statistics for homelessness may be reducing, but also we were just deemed the most intensely gentrifying city in the country, meaning that people are getting pushed out of the city, which is why those numbers may be being reduced.
And those numbers also show that it is targeting people of color, primarily Black African Americans are being pushed out. In other cities, displacement may not be tied as much with gentrification, but in the district, that is certainly a fact, right? And people, as you said, are just Ward 9. Everybody's going to Ward 9.
Daniel,
and I think it's important.
May I piggyback off of what Caitlin was saying? To really put it bluntly, I think the demand must be you can't use our money to make this place less affordable.
That's right.
And that's exactly what's happening with all of these deals. So they use these subsidies given to them by the federal government and our tax money They used these subsidies to help the financing projects of these developers who walk away with cold, hard cash. Bringing in people, charging rates that make it more unaffordable for everyone. So, if you create a project and you're building 1-bedroom units at $2,500, a pop a month, that makes it less affordable for everyone else. But you don't know that your own tax money, federal money and city money, is being used to help the developers charge at that rate. I mean, that is the double disgrace of what is occurring. And it speaks to the need for us to really work together throughout the city to demand that they do not use our land and that they do not use our money to encourage and increase unaffordability in the city. And that's something that's very basic. And I think we have to have a very basic moral conversation about this. If Donatelli wants this land and wants to be able to develop and charge, skyrocket prices for their development projects, or any other developer, fine, they pay for it. But how is the city managing profit increases for hedge funds and development companies? And that's exactly what they've been doing for the last 30 years, using our resources, our public resources, to actually get rid of us. So I think we have to have this conversation in that light. Stop using our resources that we all come together to put in a pot to serve our community, to benefit those who seek an opportunity to live here and can afford those rates, the new standard of living in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
I would like to piggyback, because I want to kind of change the perspective. Up until the financial crisis 2007 crash, it was the traditional displacement. And, and the city was invested, because almost all of the investment was public, right? It was always matching public investment in everything. There's almost no large building in this city in which there was not public investment in one way or another. But after the recession, the difference is the city's economic health depends on displacement. It's different. Before, something would happen and people would get displaced. Now the city must displace in order for the revenue, in order for what's happening to occur. This is why we go back to the zoning, why they must upzone the whole city. So the whole city you have to build higher and higher in order for this to happen. But in order to do that, whoever was in that spot has to be displaced. I mean, you can't stay while they're redeveloping where you lived, so you must go. And they promise that there's a method for you to come back, but what they're building is not enough room, it doesn't fit, or you can't afford to come back. And so they're going to give you subsidy to come back, but you pay that subsidy back to the developer who displaced you in the first place. So it's beyond anything. I don't even think it's ever happened before, unless we go back to the transatlantic slave trade or when did they displace the Native Americans out of the Trail of Tears? This is kind of the Trail of Tears kind of model that we're using to develop our city. Yeah,
the very people they say they are creating affordable housing for are these bodies that are being used to extract as much profit as possible from the city and from all of these projects. And Maurice, I think you're 100% correct. I mean, we have to fight this on many levels, but this kind of moral shift is so needed. I mean, the values that, the developers operate under and that they force our city government to operate under is crazy. And, I think all of us are trying to do that good work of not only kind of, engaging in the political process and the civic process, but this real change in just values. And, Reverend Barber talks about that. But yeah, it's so needed, especially in conversations and developments like this.
And I would also like to add, we focus on the developers, and I really don't necessarily need to defend them, but where do developers get their money from? The money is coming from pension funds, so teacher pension funds. The biggest investor, JBG, one of the biggest owners in this city, used to get most of their money from who? Universities. Yale University was one of their biggest investors. So you have subsidized public institutions working for good cause. They need endowments. They need to pay pensions to their workers, then investing and depending on investing in displacing the same people who they need in order to fund this. So we're in this a very deadly trap, and it gets worse because once you start feeding in that way, then all the models are designed to continue to feed in that very way.
That's right. That's right. Folks, you are listening to Taking Action here on WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. I'm joined in studio by Maurice Cook, Caitlin Kokolova, William Jordan from the Grassroots Planning Coalition. We're talking about what's happening at Reservation 13 and how exemplative it is of what's going on in the rest of the city. If you have any opinions, questions on what's going on, please give us a call. You can reach us at 202-588-0893. We're all putting on our headphones right now, to answer your questions or hearing your comments. If you've been through these experiences, if you're fighting this good fight, give us a call, 202-588-0893. Maurice, I want to talk to you. I want to ask you, what would a fair process have been?
Well, 100% housing for all, homes for all. We have people setting up tents all over the city, and we have a budget surplus, and we have all of this public land. Because of a lack of strategy and because of a lack of moral decency and care and priority, we've already normalized that families with babies, infants, children, could live in a hospital that was closed really for no reason because there was a lack of an investment. So families had to live in DC General for years. And, me in my role, with the nonprofit that I work for and I started, we used to support some of the families down there doing whatever we could. Those families who lived beside the methadone clinics and those families that had to live in roach and rat infested rooms of the hospital that was shut down. Those families that were isolated on the island that was Reservation 13. And I watched our political officials normalize this, make promises to these families, and I guarantee you so many of them are gone. And hey, listen, that was then. Now, what I'm worried about is, I know a lot of brothers and sisters who have recently received vouchers, right? Folks who've been on the streets for many years, and folks that I love that have been in the community for many years, they've recently received vouchers. I'm so fearful of that when that time frame for that voucher, when the rate changes and they're not receiving the same subsidy that they're receiving now. And I'm excited for them that they have a place to stay now. But if you know somebody with a voucher, I think you gotta bring them in close, because we cannot trust our political class to do the right thing with our people.
That's right. Once they get a taste, as William says, once they get a little taste, they are not going to stop.
And those vouchers are being used to create the very unaffordability that puts our people in this situation in the first place. Both things can be true. People need vouchers, and they're absolutely the tool that is making the city less, affordable. And we have to be able to understand and acknowledge both things. Reservation 13 should be public housing for all.
That's right.
Because we can live in a city where we have normalized people living in tents, right? We have more than enough resources, and we have more than enough love for our people to create a way for people to live in public housing on Reservation 13. All of it should be public housing. That would meet the demand of the crisis that we're experiencing.
And I would add that displacement is normalized, because even those folks living in tents have been displaced, right? What we saw under the metro, the Noma station, yeah. William, if you would talk a little, because we were having a good conversation before we started about what Maurice was touching on how these vouchers are used to subsidize all of this stuff that's happening, for lack of a better word.
Right. So, and I would also throw in that if the developers are going to get land for $10, then the city should divide up Reservation 13 and allow residents to buy that same land for $10, starting with the families who used to live in that shelter. So what's good for the goose should be good for the gander.
That's
Then
right.
if those families need to get subsidies to build a home, then they should be able to apply for a voucher, use that voucher to pay for their mortgage to build that home. And then if they want to upzone and add a unit for their grandmother or niece or nephew, then they should be able to do it. And so either we want to do what Brother Maurice has said, or we want to at least have the same rules for everyone. In that, I forgot the question. What was the question?
About the vouchers, how they're being used.
Okay, so in the second building for Hill East, which is F1, so the developer should have been responsible for financing the construction of that new building. And so if the city gives the developer vouchers, and vouchers pay market rate, then that is not a subsidized unit. That is a market rate unit. That is a market rate building. So the vouchers is being used to create a market rate building. And that's exactly what's happened with the use of those vouchers. So the developer hasn't done anything except pass money through and take their money off the top. And so that's how vouchers are being used now in this city. And it's been going on for years. Since the recession, they've just been quiet because people didn't want others to know that vouchers were in their building. So a lot of these new buildings, they have been putting people in with vouchers, but it's not enough because the vouchers don't fit families. They only want to do one bedrooms or efficiencies with those vouchers.
Wow. And this is happening, as you say, all over public housing. They want to voucher out, 14 properties essentially of public housing over the next couple of years. And of course, they'll probably want to do that with the remaining amount. Before we get into what can we be doing, how can folks get involved, we do have some phone calls. Caller, can you introduce yourself? Give us your name and a question or comment.
Yes, my name is Denise, and I basically have a comment. I am a black woman, and I've lived in Washington most of my life, and I am on the lower income. And I just feel fundamentally I've been experiencing disrespect from people who clearly, you can see, just came to the neighborhood. Or you go in certain businesses and you don't see anybody that look like you, and they're in the middle of your neighborhood, and they treat you with disrespect. And then if you have the nerve to call them out on it, it's a problem. I understand that oftentimes these are not the puppet masters. But I think fundamentally we can treat each other with more respect. And I, as a black woman who was born at D.C. General Hospital, who when they closed it and then built a baseball stadium, got out in the street and held up protest signs, I am angry. I am angry to be treated like I don't belong, like it's something wrong with me because of my income, like it's some shortcoming in my character, when a lot of times the deck has been stacked against people like me that don't really, it's not always a color thing, it's a money thing. The deck is already stacked for you not to get this or get that, and then people, they sit back and they point their finger at you about why you don't have this and why you don't have that, knowing all along the system is against you getting it in the first place. And I'm not angry. I try to still accept, I'm talking about fundamentally, far as on a human level, I still try to treat other people with respect, no matter where they came from, no matter their education or their income level. And I think as a human woman, I deserve the same. And I am angry because of that. In the neighborhood that I walked 30, 40 years, and all around me, I just see people treating me and other people with disrespect, and they think it's funny, and it's not. Thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for underscoring that point. That anger is real, and hopefully we can use that to organize and to keep pushing against these evildoers. We can't call it anything else. But they're colonizers. I believe we have another call.
Yes. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Good afternoon, William Jordan, Lawrence Wheatley of Grassroots Coalition. I think you answered it. One of the key concerns I've had. I'm over in Ward 5, and I'm still scratching my head over this second Walmart within what used to be our mayor's ward back in the day. She's moved out, but it came to my attention that the apartment buildings there above the Walmart are primarily or predominantly occupied by Section 8 housing and at market rate. And I think you talked about how, that we're paying market rate for what should be actually some kind of a discounted rate for the need of affordable housing.
Anybody?
No, I think that's the pattern. I think Maurice kind of alluded to that this push-pull, this balance that we're trying to create, and it's difficult because we do want people to be able to move in different neighborhoods, but we want it under their control, their choice. The difference in a lot of these things is empowerment. Is do the people who are using these tools have the power to determine their destiny, or are they pawns in somebody else's game? And that's the fight, is to empower them to not be pawns in their game. And then quickly, I just wanted to say, in terms of action, what I use for my guide to understand what's going on is particularly lately, I've downloaded Jack Evans's 2018 business plan. Right? So if you understand his business plan, then you understand who our government is and what is going on. So my first step that I would say to anyone who's engaging in this fight is download Jack Evans's business plan and then follow each individual named in that plan. And the person who wrote Jack Evans' plan is Rob Hawkins, who put the Hill East deal together when he worked for Mayor Bowser on that economic development committee.
The revolving door of private.
Right. So
yes.
All those people, you can see it's a small pool of people who are creating these deals. And then, as Jack Evans says in his plan, he knows that the council will not push back. And so he calls it flat government. He says, I can push it through, and that was in his plan, and that's how our government has been operating.
Wow. Thank you for that, William. We have another caller. Caller, can you give us your name? And if you, I apologize because we're running short on time. If you could be brief with your question or comment. But thank you for calling.
Hi. Yes. My name is Charles. And I'm an ANC commissioner in Ward 8 there, and I just like to ask the question, or first of all, address the question that the lady answered, right? When people see we have allowed ourselves to be disrespected for so long by so many different people, it's difficult for them to see us any differently than we have been seen and treated by others. But I would like to just ask if you could, or have you looked at the fact of how the ANC commissioners, the various neighborhood civic associations, and things like that play into, because we do have a voice in that, and I just think it's being manipulated as well, for lack of a better word. But I'll hang up and take your
Thank you very much.
That.
Thank you very much, Charles, and for your service as ANC. Caitlin, Maurice, anyone want to field that one?
Well, I think that's a mixed bag, right? Well, during this comprehensive plan organizing, our committee met with various, and still are in discussions and communication with various ANCs throughout the city to ensure that they had a voice to be part of the amendment process. And like I said, I think it's a mixed bag. Just like with anything, you have various voices with various interests and various relationships. And what I will say is that the ANCs have existed, and we all know in the last 30 years what has happened to the city, if you've been here any time. So those two things we know. And so how do we move forward? I think everybody has to be extremely transparent and intentional about what it is that they are about. And I can, for the record, and this is for Miss Denise, I don't know what neighborhood you live in, but I understand what you're talking about, sister. And I fight that fight on a daily basis on the street, when I get out of my car, when I get in my car, being othered in our own community. And let's be honest about it. Black people had few places in this country to have some vestige of self-determination. And Washington, D.C. was known around the world for being one of those places. And we have lost it.
That's right.
We have lost it. And sometimes I wonder, are we fighting for nostalgia, or are we fighting to create something new? And what I do know, I'm not sure, but what I do know is we have to fight. And sitting back, accepting things as they are, black, white, or whomever, if you're a working class person, your time is ticking, the sand is going through the hourglass, you will not be able to afford to live here any longer. And we have to kind of strategize and look a couple of years ahead. Reservation 13 is a place I believe we could put the pole down. We can say enough is enough and put the shield down and do whatever we must do to protect our land. I mean, over the last 30 years, I imagine it to be the way, the indigenous folks felt in Jamestown, looking at those ships coming in, the Powhatans, that's who they were, the Powhatans, looking at those ships coming in. And after a couple of years of those ships coming in, they knew exactly what every ship represented. And that was their demise of the space, their demise and potentially their existence, their culture. So many different cultural manifestations of how our culture is being demolished here. But this is the most tangible. This is the most tangible, not being able to afford a place to live and having housing security.
That's right. And we want to get the last caller on the line. Caller, if you would, and I apologize, briefly give us your question or comment.
Okay,
and thank you so much
brief.
for calling.
Thank you. It's really an extension of what was just being said. I'm concerned about the extended future of places like Washington, D.C. So when people of color are moved out of the city, and when the majority white, young, dog-possessing, et cetera, population, singular demographic has been achieved in the majority, that majority is going to have a state. That state will have 2 congressmen, something we were never able to achieve over all these decades. So there'll be the state of D.C. They will be able to vote on some very, very backwards legislation affecting people of color. Because if that population is willing to come in the way that they're coming in without thinking twice about what's being done to the population that they're moving out, not thinking twice about the way they give priority to dogs over people and children of color, not thinking twice about the devastation to homelessness, nothing, then they're positioning themselves to become incubators of fascism. That's my concern. What is the next step? I see what's happening to us, but I don't think that they have been even brought to task to have any moment of reflection about how they're moving in a very dangerous 1984-esque reality. They're so afraid of black people that they're coming in contact with that they've never come in contact with before, that they're voting for cameras up and down a residential street.
That's right.
My block in Ward 5 just had a meeting yesterday about how we're going to get these high-resolution cameras. So now my house is going to be 24-hour on somebody's camera. So this privatization of the police in the name of whatever they're calling this is a very frightening kind of reality.
Safety and security.
They're just rushing to create.
That's right. Caller, and I apologize for having to cut you off, but thank you for those very salient points. As we wrap up, any last words from you all? We only got about a minute, but, what can we do? How can folks get involved in helping in this fight?
I agree with the words that the recent caller and the previous callers have said. I think, I'm a young person living here. A lot of my friends fall into that category that you just described. And we have to tell people what's up. I mean, the narrative is the PR game on our local officials is really good. They're very good. Mayor Bowser constantly talks about wanting to build 36,000 units of housing, 12,000 of which are affordable. Like we said, affordability is not defined. Why are only 12,000 of them even deemed affordable when we have a wait list on vouchers that is over 40,000 households long? I think it's our responsibility to some of us, right? Like to have those conversations with people, to switch that narrative, to make sure that people understand the importance of listening to communities who have been here and who are on the ground with them. It's a lot of listening. It's a lot of doing the reading that William described and making connections in the spaces with people that we should trust, which are the people who have the lived experiences, the people who have gone through this for decades and feel the effects of the planning that has intentionally displaced their own communities. So that's what we've been trying to do with the Grassroots Planning Coalition. Our next meeting is going to be on March 14th at Union Temple Baptist Church from 1:30 to 4. That is just one example of a community trying to build across all parts of the city. But there are a lot of community organizations like that too, and tenant associations and resident associations that I just think that people should get involved in.
Thank you. Join an organization. Thank you all so much. We've been joined by Maurice Cook, Caitlin Kokalova, William Jordan of the Grassroots Planning Coalition. You can give us a call at Empower DC if you want to be connected to any of these folks, 202-234-9119. You can call me extension 101. Stay tuned for the news with Rob Sims and then for the Inside Out Collective. Thank you all so much for the good work that you're doing. And I felt like, we got several calls today. So folks, folks need this and want this. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.